Okay, mate, I'm pleased to say that our new parts have come through without any issue, so they'll be.
COTA awaits us here today for free practice. The passionate US crowds are gathering. So too are the drivers and teams ready to get some all-important data ahead of race day.
Okay, give us some good, consistent laps, please. We're looking for good data that we can work into a race strategy. Program complete and a job well done. We got some excellent data with that run, so come on back to the garage and I can take you through the numbers. Understood. Stopping this lap.
Sadly, it's time to say goodbye as it's a United States love affair with Formula One at the moment, so what a thrill for everyone today to see our drivers lapping COTA at full hot lap speed. It's the Circuit of the Americas, and it's qualifying. Forget pit stops, forget fuel management. It's pedal to the metal all the way here as we get ready for today's sprint. We have 10 turns to the left and 10 turns to the right here at the fantastic Circuit of the Americas. Overtaking opportunities into turn 1 and turn 12 at this anti-clockwise track. It's 3.6 miles long and we should see average lap speeds of around 126 miles per hour. Off the back of a fantastic qualifying session, it's time to see how our starting grid looks for today's sprint. Ace lines up on pole position and Max Verstappen lines up alongside. Considering the rest of the grid, we have Oscar Piastri, Norris, Fernando Alonso, Russell, Sainz, Leclerc, Hamilton, Perez, Stroll, Tsunoda, Gasly, Albon, Ricciardo, Ocon, Hülkenberg, Bottas, Magnussen and Logan Sargent. Which of these drivers will get pole position today? We'll soon find out. And alongside me in the commentary box today, former racing driver herself, Naomi Schiff. Well, they say that a change is as good as a rest, and whilst there's not much rest on show in the sprint format today, there's definitely a change to what we're usually seeing on the track. Let's look at their season, and particularly against their teammate. Fair to say, they've got the better of them more often than not.
Yes, for sure. It is never nice to be on the receiving end of that teammate battle, to be the one not winning. But for the driver who is on the upper hand, it's a real confidence boost because, as you know, the first job in Formula One is to beat your teammate. It is a team sport, but at the end of the day, that's the only driver on the grid that's got equal equipment to you. So it's the best indication of how you're doing. So for them, it's going to be a real confidence boost.
DRS is being enabled this lap. We can use DRS when you're within 1 second of the car ahead and in the DRS zone. Okay, final lap. Let's go. Final lap. Okay, focus. We need to stay on form.
Nice one. Very lovely drive. On to the next one.
Okay, good job, mate. Really, really well done. That was a fantastic drive. Bring it home.
So with the sprint concluded, join us next time for qualifying. And of course, the It's a United States love affair with Formula One at the moment, so what a thrill for everyone today to see our drivers lapping COTA at full hot lap speed. It's the Circuit of the Americas, and it's qualifying. Well, you don't need me to remind you that Formula One is now so beloved in the United States that we race here 3 times a year. But let's give respect to COTA, or the Circuit of the Americas, to give it its full name. This place laid the foundations for this moment and still remains the host of the US Grand Prix. It's the Circuit of the Americas then, situated 14 miles outside of the great city of Austin. This is a 3.6-mile lap with 20 corners, 10 to the left and 10 to the right, and top speeds of around 200 miles per hour. Overtaking opportunities are available into turns 1 and 12, especially with that rear wing DRS wide open. Let's run you through the driver grid order for today's exciting race. Max Verstappen put in a fantastic lap yesterday, and he'll start from pole position. And Lando Norris lines up alongside. Looking down the rest of the grid, we have Oscar Piastri, Ace, Russell, Leclerc, Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Stroll, Sainz, Perez, Tsunoda, Magnussen, Gasly, Ocon, Ricciardo, Albon, Bottas, Sargent, and Nico Hülkenberg rounds off the grid. And now it's time to head down to the track. And joining me in the commentary box this afternoon, the First Lady of World Motorsports, Naomi Schiff. Let's look at their season, and particularly against their teammate. Fair to say, they've got the better of them more often than not. I know what we've got to do before the start of today's race, but what about our driver? What do the final hours look like for them?
Well, every driver certainly has their own way of preparing themselves before a race. But I can tell you that pre-race rituals are a real thing. When I was in go-karting, I used to touch every wheel in a specific sequence before I got into the kart. And then I stepped up to cars and had a specific set of fireproof base layers just for race day. So watch the drivers when they're on the grid. Some may be sitting on the floor and isolating, others may be up to other things that they do. But these little things really help their minds get ready for the race.
Now use DRS. DRS now available. approaching the pit window and you're going to be on mediums. Okay, be aware, the grip levels are going to start falling away soon. Okay, the pit window's open, so let's box this lap, Pitting this lap then, come into the pits at the end of this lap. You're leading the pack, that's P1, Norris behind. Okay, they're on old softs. Your pit window's now open, pit window is open. 9 laps to go. Okay, mate, I love to see a bit of aggression, but not like this, mate. Come on, let's keep it clean. Remember, box this lap. Keep an eye on your distance to the speed limit line as you approach and make sure you don't speed. Right, we'll be doing one more stop today. One stop left in this strategy. There seems to have been a problem attaching the left front wheel. We need to try and put that behind us though and finish this race strong. That was our last stop. No more scheduled pit stops. Let's go. Look out for a bit of understeer when trailing the car ahead. They're going to be giving off dirty air, which is going to affect our tyres, so try to get past. Valtteri is in for his stop. The car behind you's just come in for the hard tyres. Car behind, running hard tyres. Okay, really, really good. You hit that target nicely. There's a long way to go in this race, so let's keep it clean. Okay, mate, we've got some clear track in front of us, and let's make the best of it. So please make this next one a very fast lap. Great stuff. It looked like you made easy work of that target. Let's try and keep that going right through to the end of the race. Green flag. I've got some information on Hamilton for you. They're retiring from the race. Caution, caution. Gap to your teammate behind, 32.5 seconds. They're on fresh mediums. They're in 19th place. Your last lap time, 1 minute 44.9. You're in first position, front of the pack. Piastri's behind. Okay, they're on fresh hards. Look after these tyres now. We want to finish the race on this compound. 2 laps left. Next time by will be your final lap. Okay, this is your final lap of the race.
Nice one. Very lovely drive. On to the next one.
Ah, superb driving. That is the race win, my friend. Well done.
They take the checkered flag then here in Austin in what has been another fabulous Grand Prix.
Wow, that's 3 wins in a row. This clearly solidifies them as a season contender. It's very tough to achieve 3 in a row, so very well done.
Sauber in the #1 spot on the podium today. What a thrilling race and what an excellent result for this team, who've never stopped fighting for that top step. After an event like that, who knows what the sport has in store for us next time out? Be sure to join us once again as we continue to bring you all the excitement of Formula One.